It feels like every other week now we're talking about some new large scale IP based trading card game. There are a ton. Basically, if you can think of an IP, it probably has a trading card game at this point. And the most recent one that has really taken the internet by storm is the Cyberpunk TCG. This is a project that's being created by the company called Weirdco out of Seattle, and it's backed by CD Projekt Red, which means it has a lot of support. They have made the interesting choice to start the game with a Kickstarter. They have reasons that they've explained, and I'm going to talk about them in this video. But the Kickstarter has, somewhat unsurprisingly, given the popularity of Cyberpunk as an IP, really exploded. At present time of recording, the Kickstarter is over $18 million of support, and obviously that is great for Weirdco, very exciting. It's obviously exciting if you are a fan of Cyberpunk, if you're excited for this TCG. And in this video, I want to talk about two different things. I've been kind of waffling about exactly how to make this video for a while, actually, kind of since the Cyberpunk TCG Kickstarter launched. I've had some thoughts about it, and I haven't found the best way to phrase them. So I just decided this morning that I was just going to figure it out and and kind of do it live, so to speak. So I want to talk about the game in two different ways. Firstly, I want to talk about it from a gameplay standpoint and its offerings in that regard, because I do think that the designers at Weirdco have found some interesting kind of wrinkles in some relatively familiar mechanics. And I want to talk about the kind of gameplay implications of their design choices. I do think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. But then I also do want to talk about the way that this game is being marketed and the kind of machinations of this Kickstarter, and why I'm a little bit concerned about it as an approach going forward. I'll kind of talk about that. I want to be really clear at the outset. If you are really excited about this game, I think that's great. And I am not here in any way to kind of poo-poo games that people like. I don't want to be that kind of channel. I don't want to be that kind of content creator. I just have a couple of concerns about what this might do to the industry as a whole in a way that might be negative for kind of like consumers, I guess is the best way to put it. So we'll talk about that second. I want to talk about the gameplay first, though, because I think really when you're talking about a new CCG, the gameplay should be first. If the gameplay is really good, then maybe we can overlook some other elements. And if the gameplay is bad, then maybe we have to be even more critical. So let's talk about the gameplay first. The Cyberpunk TCG is a legend based game. So it's another one in which we're going to be having persistent effects that you design your deck around. There are four different colors that the different legends can be assigned to, and you pick three of them to be in the kind of leading your deck. What's kind of interesting about the way that they've gone about doing this in the Cyberpunk TCG is that each legend gives you a certain amount of RAM of its color, and you use that RAM to determine what other cards you can put in your deck. So this is kind of akin to Star Wars Unlimited, where you have an aspect color of your leader, you have an aspect color of your base, and you can use those aspect colors to determine which cards go in your deck. So you might well play a yellow leader and a yellow base, and then you would be able to play double yellow cards. And in the same way, in the Cyberpunk TCG, if you play two legends that both give you yellow RAM, that means you get to play cards that use 4 yellow RAM, because each legend gives 2. So that's pretty interesting. Each of the legends has their own abilities. Some of them can be used as units in combat. Some of them just have effects when you flip them up. And interestingly as well, your legends in this game can be used as resources. So what that means is that you're actually starting with more resources than the average trading card game, I would say, because you start with 3 legends. I believe on your first turn of the game, you don't have access to all of them, but from the second turn onward, you actually are going to start with 5 resources, from what I understand of the kind of learn to play offerings. So what is the resource system? If you're familiar with Lorcana, you're going to be extremely familiar with this resource system. If you've played Star Wars Unlimited, it's comparable to that one as well. Cards have an eddy symbol on them, which is the currency in the Cyberpunk universe. So there are going to be certain cards that cannot be used as resources, but any card that has an eddy symbol on it can be revealed at the start of your turn and put face down in your resource area to be used as a resource. Very similar to Lorcana. This is I would say at this point, you can call it tried and true mechanic. Increasingly, we are moving towards TCG design that is trying to reduce negative resource variance. You can see this in Riftbound with the Rune deck. Star Wars Unlimited and Lorcana have this kind of effect of like almost any card in your hand can be a resource. And games like One Piece have like the Dawn deck, where again, it's just something that you get every turn no matter what. And I think that that's a pretty positive change in the design space. I know that the Magic land system is much maligned, and several people actually have recently made videos defending that system. And I would also defend that system as well, but I don't think you want every game to have that level of resource variance. So yeah, I don't think that this is objectionable. Obviously, it's not groundbreaking or brand new, but at the same time, it is a resource system that I think is highly functional. So I don't think that you can be all too critical about that. And I do think that it's interesting that because your legends can be used as resources as well, that the curve of this game is going to look pretty different from a lot of other card games, and that's going to change the way that you do card evaluation. The combat system is also pretty reminiscent of Lorcana. So unlike games like Magic, where you attack and your opponent declares blockers, or games like Star Wars Unlimited, where you choose what to attack no matter what, in this game, you can either choose to attack your opponent directly, or you can attack a unit that is, I believe the term they're using is exhausted. So if your opponent has an exhausted unit, you can choose to attack that. There are specific keywords that allow you to interact with attacks. So like if you have a unit that has blocker is the keyword that they're using, you're able to get in the way of an attack and reassign how that works. This is very Lorcana-esque from my understanding. Again, totally functional combat system. It creates interesting tension where if you have a unit with a powerful ability, you have to make this choice about whether or not you want to use it and expose it to potentially being killed by your opponent's units. You have to make the choice about whether attacking is worth it because you might lose your unit on the crackback. I think that this combat system is, again, very reasonable, highly functional, not super unique. Again, like this is not a system that is groundbreaking in any way, but it is also not a system that is, I think, a bad system. Like I think it is a totally reasonable system that creates lots of interesting dynamic gameplay decisions, and so I don't have any issues with that. So that's the kind of familiar aspects of the game. The resource system, the legends, the combat system, these are all reminiscent of games that are currently on the market in pretty obvious direct ways. So what are the new things that the Cyberpunk TCG is doing to kind of set itself apart? Obviously, if you aren't aware, oh, there's a cat here. Mabel, would you like to come join the video? Come on up. Yes. Okay. Mabel has joined the video. So obviously, if you are familiar with Cyberpunk as an IP, obviously it's multimedia at this point. There are the video games, the most recent one obviously being Cyberpunk 2077, which is huge. It is also, though, a tabletop role-playing system, and they have really leaned into that element of the game here. So in addition to your 40 to 50 card deck that you build, you also are expected to bring a set of polyhedral die. And what you use these for are what they're calling in their system gigs. And so gigs are the win condition of this game, and then they also have other gameplay implications. So on your turn, you get to take one of your dice other than the d20. The d20 is always rolled last. You roll it, and then you put it in what's called your gig area. Now, the numbers on these dice matter because you're going to have certain cards that care about the value of gigs. And you're also going to have cards that care about the total value of all your gigs. This is a resource that they're calling street cred. And so essentially you are you are adding this kind of dice rolling element to the trading card game, which is going to introduce a decent amount of variance. And you might think, well, isn't this kind of frustrating? If my opponent high rolls and I low roll, I just lose the game. But I think that they've done a very reasonable job of mitigating this in two ways. Number one, gigs can be stolen. So when you attack your opponent directly, the outcome of doing that attack is that you get to steal a gig from your opponent. You even get to choose. So let's say that on my first turn, I roll a d10 and I high roll and I get a 10. And now all of a sudden, I have the most valuable resource in the game at this point. But it's not as though as soon as I get that resource, I get it for the rest of the game. It now just becomes an interaction point where my opponent and I are likely now going to fight over this gig in the early game. Additionally, there are, so far spoiled, a bunch of cards that seem to interact with gig dice and allow you to change them, both making them higher and making them lower. And so there's variance mitigation in that as well. There's ways to interact with your opponent. I will say that I do think that there's still some issues around high rolling. One of the cards that I saw that made me think about this is there's a card that's been spoiled that basically, like, it either increases one of your gig dice by a certain amount, or if it's already at its max value, you draw a card. And depending on how valuable drawing a card is in this game, that might mean that if, like, you high roll and you roll the max value on a gig right away and you get to just start using this as a draw engine, like, it's possible that ends up feeling oppressive in some instances where maybe you high roll and you get to a street cred level that allows you to unlock a really powerful effect in a way early and on in the game that allows you to kind of snowball. I haven't seen enough cards yet to be able to tell you whether I think that they've done a good job designing around that or not. That's one of the design concerns that I would have, but at the same time, I don't have any reason to believe that they wouldn't have perceived that as a potential design concern and made choices accordingly to attempt to mitigate those issues. It's worth noting the design team for this game, I could, in the credits, there are at least 5 main designers credited, and I didn't recognize many of the names. I did do some Googling. They all have reasonable resumes. The principal designer, I believe, is responsible for a couple of successful, reasonably highly rated deck building games that have been kickstarted. Additionally, David McDarby is on the design team, which is the name that I recognized. He was a Star City Games content creator in, like, the early 2010s, and then went and worked at WotC for a couple of years. I think he's worked elsewhere as well. But yeah, so, like, obviously this is a design team with a bunch of designers who have some real chops. So, you know, you have to imagine that if you're designing your game around having these polyhedral dice as a main functionality, that you would be thinking about these things that I just talked about. You know, I do think that it is reasonable to assume that they've considered this. The last thing that I want to talk about is the way that you actually win the game. And so the way that you win the game is by starting your turn with 6 gig dice in play, or if it gets to the point where both players have used all their dice, because you add 1 per turn, the game goes into overtime, and the first player to get to 7, regardless of whether it's the start of their turn or not, wins the game. And so what this means is that there are a finite number of turns in a game of the Cyberpunk TCG. You are never going longer than, I believe, 7 turns, right? Because if you add 1 per turn, and then maybe you have a sequence where your opponent takes your 6 dice, and then you start your turn with 5, and you take 1 to go back to 6. They start their turn with 5. They add their 6th. Now you both have 6, and I guess you go to this overtime situation where as soon as someone can get to 7, you win the game. So yeah, the game is just never going to be super long. And I think that creates interesting design space. I wonder whether it has positive or negative impact on the ability to have kind of like archetype diversity. We often think about archetypes in trading card games as being like, like aggro, control, mid range, right? Like this is a really simple approximation, and it doesn't work for every trading card game, but certainly for ones like this where you're slowly acquiring resources, I think it is a fine approximation to use. And if the game is a set amount of turns, I do kind of wonder how much you're actually able to play into these more controlling strategies. Like, is there going to be space to create a ramp strategy? Because is there enough time for you to be spending the first couple of turns of the game setting up your resources, either in terms of cards or in terms of additional resources in cards that you have sold and put in your resource row? I don't know, and I do worry a little bit that this system means that every game is going to turn into a highly tempo based game. I, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily a problem, but it's certainly something to consider. The positive of this, though, and this is definitely a relevant one, is from a tournament logistics standpoint, it is kind of nice to say, hey, if we're going to play best of three, we know that the maximum number of turns that our tournament can be is like number of rounds times 21 or 18. I still haven't worked out whether I think the games can go to 6 or 7 turns. I haven't figured that part out yet, but it is good to have it be a situation where there really is like a max number of turns that you can play. That has really positive implications. Has really positive implications for organizing tournaments and having things that are going to finish on time. So that's definitely a pretty reasonable one as well. Besides that, I mean, I think that they've started to reveal some things. One element of the gameplay that I know receives some initial pushback is that as of right now, there isn't anything that is playable at what we would call in Magic like instant speed. Everything kind of just happens at sorcery speed, and so they have said that that's going to change. That they're adding cards that can be played like during combat and stuff like that. But most of their cards right now, I'm just looking at the spoiler on my other monitor if you're wondering, but most of the cards right now have like very clear triggers as to when they activate, like combat triggers, things like that. And they've already indicated that like this is not, that they don't view this as like the full breadth of the design depth that they're going to go into, even for the kind of initial release. So I think you have to cut them some amount of slack in that regard. But I do wonder whether or not it's going to feel a little bit predictable what the gameplay is going to look like if in initial days, if everything is happening at this kind of sorcery speed. Uh, Other things to talk about, the art is unbelievable. Really, really great art. And importantly, the artists are credited, which is nice as well. We obviously love to see that. And I think it kind of depends, right? Like if the cyberpunk art style is for you, then this is like exactly what you want. And if the cyberpunk art style is not for you, then obviously maybe it isn't. But again, that's okay. The whole point of having these IP-based TCGs is that they're going to really, really appeal to certain people and maybe not necessarily need to appeal to everyone. So yeah, I think that's most of what I have to say about the gameplay for now. I've seen a bunch of people making videos talking about the gameplay implications of Cyberpunk, and whether it's going to be a fun good game. And frankly, like, A, the entire first set isn't even spoiled yet. B, people haven't really gotten to play the game in any meaningful way yet, and I don't know that you can yet make really meaningful determinations on it. I think it's better to kind of look at it as in an approximation and talk about what we think the design decisions that they've made imply the game might be like. And for me, I think it looks like it's going to be a game where tempo matters, where if you get ahead early, it might be kind of challenging to come back. But at the same time, I haven't yet seen a card spoiled where I've gone, yeah, I think this card looks horrifically objectionable or anything like that. Everything seems like relatively relatively reasonable and in line. The one other thing I'll quickly add, I guess, and this is going to maybe bridge us into the second part of this conversation, but they did recently, I think, as in at time of recording, it was yesterday that they revealed this, that the first set is going to have 140 cards, and there was a lot of discussion in the Discord about that number, whether that number is enough, or whether that's going to be problematic from a gameplay like format diversity standpoint. So I went and pulled a couple of numbers just for comparison's sake. The Bandai TCGs are typically lower, and I think maybe this is who they are comparing themselves to. And that's a comparison that I think is relatively apt if you look at the way that the game is designed, if you look at the systems, there are definitely some Bandai elements to them. So I don't think that that's a ridiculous comparison to make. So, like, for example, the first One Piece set had 121 cards, as far as I could tell. The first Gundam set had 152 cards. So 140 is kind of right in the middle of that. But at the same time, this number is low in this grand scheme of TCGs. Games like Lorcana launched with 204. Star Wars Unlimited's first set, Spark of Rebellion, had 252. Riftbound released with almost 400 cards. Bloomburrow, a recent Magic the Gathering expansion, had 282 cards. And I think it's going to depend. If the intention is that this is a game that you can draft, 140 is not enough. But if the idea is that you are just opening packs as a method of card acquisition, then 140 is fine. And realistically, from a affordability and deck construction standpoint, you might actually prefer a lower set number, just in order to potentially like further guarantee that people are going to be opening the premium playables. So I don't think that the 140 number is super spooky. Like, it's not like they were like there are 90 cards. That would have been a little disconcerting, and I would have been like, well, okay, there's probably going to be one deck that's better than everything else. I think with 140 you're likely to end up with at least two playable decks out of the first set, and they have obviously indicated that there are more sets coming, and at a relatively high cadence. So that'll also expand the format relatively quickly. Let me know if in the comments if you know this. I could not find anything on their side about whether this game was going to have rotation, whether they'd made any indications about whether that was in their design philosophy in the long term. I know that they have indicated a strong desire to have a really robust organized play system. That's great, obviously awesome. If you're going to lead into organized play as something that you're hanging your hat on as a TCG, I do think it is important to also have a vision for what the competitive format is going to look like for players. And I couldn't really find that yet. But again, a lot of that is early days, so I understand it. So now that we've talked about the game as a game, and I would say that like my overall kind of impressions of the game as a game is that it looks like it's a very reasonable riff on a bunch of familiar but reasonable mechanics. Obviously, like the gig dice and the set amount of turns are the two really big new things that they're doing, and then outside of that, a lot of it is really really familiar. That's probably okay for getting people up to speed and learning quickly. And rolling dice is fun. I like rolling dice, so that works for me. Let's talk about the Kickstarter though, because the Kickstarter at time of recording, as I mentioned at the top of the video, is over 18 million, and I feel kind of weird about it. So let's talk about what about the Kickstarter feels a bit strange to me, and then we'll talk about what their stated goals were with using a Kickstarter to launch the game. Okay. So, new view for me. I figured it'd be easiest to just do this live rather than trying to go in and post and recording some stuff to put over my audio. So we're just gonna look at it as is. I think you might hear my mouse sometimes. I've been working really hard to try and eliminate the background noises, and frankly, it is vexing me. So, apologies in advance for that, but I'm doing the best I can currently. I'm learning as I go. So this is the Cyberpunk TCG Kickstarter. I want to say right off the bat that I've also seen people talking about this as a Kickstarter TCG and comparing it to games like Altered or MetaZoo, which, like in the case of Altered, recently collapsed. And I think that there has been some like accusations levied against the game that it's like, oh, Kickstarter games always fail, and this is a recipe for disaster. I don't know why you would start your game this way. And I think it is important to understand the distinction between this game and other kind of kickstarted TCGs, in the sense that this game in the Cyberpunk TCG has a team of like 25 people behind it, and the game is done. It's not a situation where they have like a design document and sample art for a couple of things, and then they're now seeking funding to finish the game. Like, this Kickstarter is essentially a storefront, and it's them launching the game. It's kind of like also a marketing vessel, right? This is a way for them to make a big splash in the media by showing off how much support there is for the game. And with an IP like Cyberpunk, it was relatively safe to assume that the that the Kickstarter would go crazy. Basically, like, is probably the easiest way to describe it. So I don't think that the comparison for this of being a Kickstarter TCG is really apt, because I think that there's kind of an implied indie nature to that is clearly just non-existent here. This is a project with a large team. It clearly has a reasonable amount of corporate backing. Like, they don't need this money to pay their employees. They need this money. Well, this is them selling the game, so it's a bit different, right? And I think that is worth considering. So if we look at the Kickstarter, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is, like I mentioned, it really is like, it is a marketing vessel, I think, more than anything else. You'll notice that the top of the Kickstarter features like most funded Kickstarter ever. It has a quick overview, and then it gets immediately into what the pledge tiers are, what the rewards are for backing now. And you actually have to go, you know, past the stretch goals to get to how to play and the rules, the anatomy of cards, all this kinds of things, the rarity system. And so, like, if you needed more of a more of a reason to kind of believe me that this is not necessarily them trying to get support to aspirationally make this game, like, look no further. Like, they knew that this was going to be popular enough that they were obviously going to hit the funding goal immediately, and very much so this is clearly intended to be more of a marketing tool. One thing about this, though, and I mentioned that I had some kind of concerns about it, are to do with the tiers. So when you're looking at the tiers that are available, the lowest that you can back at to get product is at $50 USD. This gets you 2 starter decks. Worth noting, I didn't notice this at first, but these decks do come with dice, which I think does up the value. In my head, $50, like, and technically 60 if you're buying them at what they're listing as MSRP. That in my head felt like a lot of money. But I guess if you're also getting a set of polyhedral dice, like, it starts to get more into the realm of being like a reasonable thing to do. But my big thing with this Kickstarter, and the big thing that kind of begins to stress me out, is when you get down into these really kind of premium backing tiers. Typically with TCGs that end up on Kickstarter, the higher tiers of support are often reserved for or marketed at getting stores a way to back the game and get enough product to have the game in stock when it launches. And that's pretty clearly not the intention here. So, like, if we look at this $2,800 tier, this has 18 booster boxes. That feels store-ish, right? That you buy like 650 booster packs to be able to stock your store. But then it also comes with like one cloth playmat. It comes with a pre-graded CGC card. It comes with another exclusive card. And like these are things that are very clearly targeted at a single person to purchase this. So I find that a bit strange, and I really hesitate. I don't want to call it like predatory or anti-consumer. I think that that is going too far, and that that's not necessarily fair. They are trying to provide value for people who want to back this at a high level, and I do get that. But when you get down to these higher tiers, like these things where it's like 6 uncut sheets, like this is a collector's item, I guess that makes sense. But these $8,000 tiers where there's only 100 of them each, like this to me does feel like FOMO marketing. Like I understand you want to give early adopters something to reward them for being early adopters. But like is $8,000 really the price point at which we need to be offering that to people? Like isn't that like kind of insane? And I guess I just worry that this is going to start to become a trend in the industry of we're going to launch a new TCG, and the way we're going to go about doing it is by basically creating this pre-order system where I believe they've said Q3 of this year is when the first kind of wave of product is going to go out. And yeah, project timeline, we can look here. So yeah, wave 1 is Q3, wave 2 is Q4. And so like essentially people have put down a decent amount of money. Well, they haven't yet because the product hasn't funded. But once it funds, people will have put down a decent amount of money to get their game pieces in like 3 to 5 months. And I really, I guess what I'm getting at is like, I don't know that I want to live in a world where I need to pre-order my TCGs this far in advance. It just kind of weirds me out, for lack of a better word. I do want to talk about why they have structured it this way, because they do have a very clear kind of company line on why a Kickstarter. And I don't think it's here. I don't think they have it here, but uh, essentially what they have said, and this is, I think, a very reasonable conclusion. Weirdco has clearly had their ear to the ground, and they clearly have identified what some of the problems in the industry are right now. Most notably, if you look at like Riftbound's release, it was fraught with this problem, which is that oftentimes with these new TCGs, set one is hard to predict how much you're supposed to print. And companies are often going to guess under because they don't want to be overexposed if they end up printing a ton and then the game, even if the game doesn't flop, but if it's less popular than you expect it to be initially, you end up in this situation where you're kind of like holding the bag on having all this extra product printed. I think that that's a real problem to an extent, and obviously that's a problem that you want to address. And then there's a secondary problem where if you don't print enough and the game is more popular than you expected, which is what happened with both Star Wars Unlimited and Riftbound, um, you end up in this situation where scalping is a big issue. You have scalpers kind of like uh, eating up a bunch of the product and then reselling it for like ridiculous prices. If you've gone and looked at a Riftbound Origins booster box price right now, by the way, like it is relatively abominable in that regard. And so their theory and their kind of solution to this problem was we will allow people to buy in now and we will print to demand the first kind of wave of set one. And I th- I understand how we went from here is the problem, and I understand how they decided this was the solution. But for me, I just feel like, in particular, the numbers feel really off. And I also really worry about the impacts on organized play for this. for example, right? Like if we look at this $1,000 tier, which is people getting 6 booster boxes, this I think is largely people buying in for themselves, for either to collect or to play. Um, this is like a very I mean, I don't want to say reasonable price point, but this is a price point that you can imagine people buying in for if they were going to be getting into a game that they felt really passionate about. What this means is that if you are a store and you want to eventually potentially support the Cyberpunk TCG, there are at least 1,900 people who are likely never buying from you because they've already opened a case. They have 2 copies of each starter deck. Like, they don't have a reason to purchase sealed product beyond beyond what they got as part of their Kickstarter. And I think that that's a real issue that exists even when you look at maybe people getting like 3 booster boxes, which is, like almost 5,700 backers. Even people getting 2 booster boxes plus the 2 starter decks. Like, how much more appetite for sealed product are these players going to have? I don't know. And I think that I know I've been in the Discord, and the people from the team have said that they've already have like around 3,000 LGSs that have expressed interest in supporting organized play. That's awesome. Clearly that's a good thing for the game long term. I'm going to go back to full cam. I think we've looked at the Kickstarter enough. Obviously that's a good thing, and it's a positive for them that they have this level of interest already. But at the same time, I know anecdotally, just from talking to a couple of people that I know who work at stores, that they were approached by distributors, or I don't know if it was distributors or Weirdco themselves, and they declined to carry the game. And in part, it's like a situation of, well, you know, we don't have that much space in the store, and if you're going to have already extracted $20 million of value out of this ecosystem, like, what is left for an LGS? And I think that that's the big thing that I keep running up against with this Kickstarter is that, okay, it's all well and good. I understand the idea of prevent scalping, get product into the hands of players. Again, I think that they have identified the correct problem, but the solution that they have selected basically sucks all of the money from that process up to the original company who creates the game, and it cuts out the LGSs, who I think are like relatively important for the long-term survival of the game. And I just worry about that, I guess, in the long term, and I'm not convinced that that is actually going to ultimately be a good thing for adoption. Additionally, I think you run into issues of you're basically expecting stores to buy into the retail program, because it's also worth noting that they don't really intend for stores to use this Kickstarter as a way to stock themselves early. Apparently, they have a separate retail release planned that will have different art, and I think that in theory that's what's going to ideally in their mind attract players to then go buy a retail release as well. There probably will be people who do that. I mean, obviously, like, there's a reason why all of these IPs are going and creating trading card games. It's because they print money. It's because people are excited about them. And so maybe all of these concerns are for nothing. And I think that's why I have continued to come up against this like mental block about making this video, because like I don't want to I don't want to just like downplay the issues that Weirdco is trying to solve. I think that they have very clearly identified the correct issues in the industry. I'm just not convinced that this solution is as pro consumer as they want it to be necessarily. And in particular, stuff like the 1,000 plus, like the 3,000 and $8,000 pledge tiers, those to me feel, they just feel weird. Like, I just don't know that it's necessarily the healthiest thing for people to be able to go and drop $8,000 on this amount of collectibles. Like, it's more cards than you would ever need in a million years. So maybe it is a bunch of stores that are doing it. I don't know. But it just feels a bit off to me, I guess. And I guess that's where I keep running up against. One other thing that I that I just wanted to point out is, like, many of these tiers include a pre-graded card from CGC, and I'm not like a card grading person. I'm not a collector. Like, I'm very much so a trading card as game pieces person. Uh, but like, doesn't everyone who backs at that tier getting a PSA, or not? It's not PSA. It's CGC, but a CGC graded 10. It's the same card. It's V, I think, and it's like, doesn't that mean that it's not valuable? Like, if you know the population count is going to be like 3,000, 4,000, like, is that really a collectible? There are thousands of them, and it kind of seems like it defeats the purpose of grading it to an extent. But maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that. And I guess I'll close this video now, because I think I've started to enter my circuitous logic death spiral that sometimes happens at the end of these things. I want to be really, really clear. If you are excited about the Cyberpunk TCG, I think that is awesome, and I'm really hoping that you really enjoy it and that it is exactly what you want out of the game. From a game design standpoint, I think that the game looks totally reasonable, doing new things that look cool. I love rolling dice. I will probably, if someone has this nearby, I would happily sit down and play a couple of games. The Kickstarter weirds me out. I guess there's just no better word for it. This system of pre-ordering your trading cards for way farther in the future, before the whole set is even spoiled, I just find that to be a little bit strange, and I don't mind it so much at the lower tiers, but in particular these, like, $8,000 support tiers, they just feel strange to me, in the context of, they're clearly not even really intended for stores. They're intended for individual collectors. I just think that, obviously, that while there's clearly an appetite for those things because they all sold out very quickly, I'm not convinced that that's the best thing for the hobby long term, and that's best thing for TCGs in the long term. But at the same time, if it keeps the cost of playing the game low, which is also theoretically like their stated goal, then maybe it's fine, and maybe I just need to get over it and not worry about it. All in all, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you stayed all the way to the end, and I will see you in the next one.